And good evening and welcome to another live broadcast with students here at the University of the Virgin Islands, specific to our communication programs that are providing our students with an opportunity to not only be engaged in this type of a discussion, but to also be able to talk about the significance of November 23rd. So what is November 23rd in the Virgin Islands? And we are going to do our best to highlight some key points and what we desired to do in regard to showing our respect for November 23rd. We have invited some students, all of the class from Communications 120, which is a public course. And I have asked the students to share with us in the conversation around Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, which is November 23rd every year. And this is in accordance with the Virgin Islands Code. Please, everyone, keep your sound on mute unless you're speaking. Thank you. And what we're going to start with, which is, it's always ideal to start at the beginning, because then that way persons really have an idea of clear awareness and understanding of the process. Again, we're speaking of Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. And what we are going to share is the actual code. And then, well, first and foremost, we're going to start with the legislative act, which is Act 6285, which was initiated through Bill number 230044, approved August 17th, 1999. And will the first student that has those first few lines start, please?
Hi, good day.
Greetings.
November 23rd of each year shall be observed as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day throughout the Virgin Islands.
Beautiful. And let's go from the code. That was from the code, so let's continue on from the actual act. And I'll start this portion and chime in as you are able to. We might actually go a little bit differently in our original planned order, so that we can at least continue. And I'll just kind of call on you, those of you that are here, to actually tune into the process. To recognize and commemorate the St. John Slave Revolt of 1733, and to observe November 23rd as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. Whereas on November 23rd, 1733, 12 to 14 African slaves on the Danish West Indian island of St. John took the initial step in what turned out to be the benchmark event in the struggle for freedom in the now United States Virgin Islands. And Benaya, why don't you continue from there?
Whereas this step, the conquest of Fortsburg garrison was the first major assault on the system of the chattel slavery in the Danish West Indies. And
let's go to Lyanna. Go ahead, Lyanna.
Whereas it predated the American Revolution by 43 years, the French Revolution by 56 years, and the Great Haitian Revolution by 71 years, and
keep going.
Whereas the St. John African Revolt can be numbered among a significant group of Akan-inspired revolts that took place in the Caribbean, and
Shamar. Okay, no worries. Thank you, Shamar.
Whereas the event in St. John stands very high on the rank of world events where oppressed people rallied from freedom against overwhelming odds and succeeded, even though it only lasted for 4 to 6 months. And whereas the actual seizures constituted one of the boldest assaults on the slave institution in early Danish West Indian history. And whereas the Africans led by Kanta and Claes came to the fort under the pretense of supplying the fort with the firewood, all the defenders, save one, were casualties. One soldier stayed alive by hiding under the bunk. He later traveled on St. Thomas, where he carried the news of Fortsburg's captured. And whereas...
Pause. Let's go to you, Ms. Gentles.
Whereas, after the garrison was secured by the African freedom fighters, Kanta and Claes raised the flag and fired several cannon shots as a signal that battle had begun. Two main columns of Africans now headed towards strategic plantations, one traveling around the north side, attacking slave masters, burning plantations and confiscating goods. Another column took the south shore and operated in a similar fashion. This carefully planned revolt expanded to the entire island. The Amina-led army soon controlled many parts of the cultivated lands, and their maroon brethren controlled the hills of St. John. And whereas by the month of April 1734, although the Aminas were very short on ammunition and their ranks depleted by the constant marches and clashes with the combined forces of Danish, English, Dutch, and enslaved Creole, the struggle for freedom was extremely strong. And
the next person shall be, let's see who we got in our reservoir. Sierra.
Whereas on May 23rd, 1734, exactly 6 months to the day from the assault on Fortsburg, an extraordinary discovery was made by the Negro militia from St. Thomas under the command of Mingo Tamarin, a former who had the complete confidence of the Danish authorities. His detachment on a reconnoiter discovered 25 bodies, 19 African men and 6 women in a wooded area. The position of the bodies and the nature of their wounds indicated that they had committed ritual death in pursuit of their freedom. And whereas the love of liberty that these ancestral heroes of the Virgin Islands pursued in 1733 struggled for freedom from the chattel slavery is one of the singular events in West Indian Caribbean history and the annals of mankind.
Pause. Mr. Wilson.
And whereas this struggle was a beacon of hope to enslaved people everywhere, it sends a clear message to the slaveholding system that the spark of freedom had been lit on these shores. Now, therefore, be it enacted by the legislature of the Virgin Islands.
Pause. Yasmin. Ms. Mark.
Section 1. The legislature of the Virgin Islands, on behalf of the people of the Virgin Islands, hereby recognizes and commemorates the American Slave Revolt of 1733. Section 2, Title 1, Chapter 11, Virgin Islands Code is amended by adding a new section 196 to read.
Pause. Let's go to Tashara.
Section 196, Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. November 23rd of each year shall be observed as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day throughout the Virgin Islands. At least 15 days prior to Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, the Governor of the Virgin Islands shall issue a proclamation calling upon the residents of the Virgin Islands to join together in appropriate ceremonies to reflect on this most important day in history of the Virgin Islands.
Pause.
The commission.
Pause, Queen.
The Commissioner of the Department of Education shall be responsible for the reproduction and dissemination of information on the 1733 African Slave Revolt to all public, private, and parochial schools. The Commissioner of Education shall also be responsible for organizing and publicizing events throughout public schools and the territory for the celebration of Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day.
And well, go ahead, Queen. Finish the last section. Go ahead.
In addition to any event organized on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day pursuant to subsection herein, the legislature shall hold appropriate ceremonies on St. John.
And we're going to pause right there and we're going to stop sharing. So we've had this conversation in class around preparing to highlight what Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is, why November 23rd is very, very important, the connection that it has to St. John, Virgin Islands. At that time, St. John, part of the Danish West Indies in its early years. And we also had an opportunity to navigate how we would have a conversation around developing speeches that would help us to highlight what does this mean to you. So this whole exercise in our gathering this evening is focused solely around what does Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day represent to you? Are there particular persons that you may consider and think should be included? And then of course, I'm looking for those names in the chat. Persons have sent their presentations so that we can actually share those presentations with our viewers and our listeners, because this is an opportunity for you to show the culmination of what you were exposed to, learning techniques around public speaking, elocution, etc., but putting it in context to something that's as important as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. And I'm looking for those names in the chat so I don't have to call out anybody in particular. So we can just put it in the order. Fantastic. Sierra, so let's start with you so that we can see what you have to share in regards to Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. Are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sierra Simulcare, and I will be presenting a speech on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. I will be presenting an excerpt from the VI Code and VI Legislative Act 6285 on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day and its importance to me. Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is for us to remember an important part of early Virgin Islands history. To be more specific, it is to commemorate and honor the enslaved African people who led and fought in the St. John's Slave Revolt of 1733 for their freedom against enslavement. This was said to be led by an enslaved African female named Brefru, who was believed to be an Akwamu queen, and some other enslaved persons that were also a part of multiple African tribes. Upon their successful launch and takeover on November 23rd of Estate Portsburg, the island of St. John remained under the control of these revolutionary Africans until 1734. On May 23rd, 1734, exactly 6 months to the day from the assault on Portsburg, an extraordinary discovery was made by the Negro militia from St. Thomas under the command of Mingo Tamarin, a former freed color Bombak who had complete confidence of the Danish authorities. His detachment on a reconnoissance discovered 25 bodies, 19 African men and 6 women in a wooded area. The position of these bodies and the nature of their wounds indicated that they had committed ritual death in pursuit of their freedom. This was Queen Brefru, one of the leaders of the St. John Revolution in 1733, and some of the people that fought with her who wanted to escape capture by the European military. So to conclude my speech, Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is important to me because the St. John Slave Revolt of 1733, led by African people, paved the way to freedom. And this historic event led to the abolition of slavery in the Virgin Islands and the freedoms that we have today. These are my references, and thank you for listening.
We can unmute so we can show some love and give some claps, right? And then we can go back to move. Yeah, very well done. Very well done. Thank you for that, Sierra Smoke-Care. And the next person that will share with us will be Queen Nefertari Trading, please. Are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Queen Nefertari Trading. My presentation is called VI Freedom Fighters, Remembering St. John's Revolt of 1733. Okay, so what happened exactly on St. John in 1733? Well, some slaves that was originally from Ghana, also called Akwamu, captured Fortsburg on November 23rd. They started a slave revolt against the Danish plantation owners on St. John who were imposing slavery on them. And this revolt was led by a woman named Brefu, who was also from Ghana. The slaves were able to take over the island by capturing the fort called Fortsburg, also called Fort Hill back then. And with the advantage of having 1,087 slaves on the island compared to 208 Danish colonizers, many Danish people were killed and they were able to hold on to the island and have control for 6 months. And it is known as one of the longest and earliest slave resistance in the Americas. After 6 months, the French did send 200 soldiers from Martinique to subdue the slaves in 1734. But despite the defeat, this uprising led way to emancipation in the Danish West Indies in 1848. Okay, so reasons for the resistance. So this is just some of the reasons. There were several more, but just to name a few, it was the cruelty of the overseers that were left to manage the plantations by the landowners. Also the harsh living conditions that started from the droughts in 1725 and 1726. This led to the diversion of low water to sugarcane and cotton plantations at the expense of domestic use of water by the Ghana people. This also was a big deal because a hurricane had hit St. John and that had also caused insect infestation. The large number of enslaved Africans, which had outnumbered the whites, 187 slaves to 206 people, they were all brutally treated, and they had several punishments just when they disobeyed, and those punishments could be heavy whipping, amputation of limbs, and death by hanging, which we also learned that a lot of people was hanged by a big about tree here on St. Croix. If they didn't revolt, some people left the island or they just hide in the bushes. Conclusion. So it's important to know the various histories of the U.S. Virgin Islands and how much we fought for our freedom. The will to fight, the will of fire really runs in our veins, which we constantly seen in our history, starting from the lady who ran this revolt, Brefu of Ghana, down to the 3 queens of St. Croix, of the Fireburn, and more. All I could think we can do is just continue telling our story to the next generation to inspire and educate and to celebrate these days of remembrance. Thank you for listening, and these are my references.
Let's unmute, give some applause, show some love for the presentation, your colleague. And the next person that will share will be Lyanna Carr. Let's welcome Ms. Carr. Are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes. I just want to ask if you guys can hear me.
We hear you well. Does everyone else hear her well?
Yes.
And we do see the screen as well.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Lyanna Carr, and today I will be presenting this topic. What is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day? Why is Virgin Islands Freedom Day important to Fighters Day important to me? My objectives are to inform my audience. I am informing my audience on the importance of Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day and what happened on that day. The central idea is this day is no ordinary day in the Virgin Islands. On this day, people such as Virgin Islanders fought for what we needed. Without this day, we may not be where we are now. So, what is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day? Well, this day took back on November 23rd, 1733. On this day, and on many more days, there began a revolt in St. John. This revolt lasted for 6 months, and it was only possible because the slaves on the island of St. John overpowered the European settlers. So the slaves were like 1,000 and the European settlers were about 200 and more. During the revolt, many plantations and sugarcane fields were destroyed. Many people, both European settlers and slaves, were killed during this time. Some were hanged and some did take their own lives so that the settlers did not take theirs. By 1734, the revolt was eventually put down. Why is this day so important to me? This day is so important to me because of how hard our ancestors fought for what is true and right. Without them, there's a great chance that we would not be where we are today. If they did not fight, who could have? If there wasn't a leader, who would have been their leader? I am proud to be a Virgin Islander to represent this, and I'm proud of this day that has happened. These are my references, and thank you for listening.
Let's give some applause. You can unmute. Let's share that energy for your colleague. This is going well. And I see we are moving, we're slicing through this very, very quickly. I love it. Shamar Davis, are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes, I am.
Beautiful.
All right, are you seeing it?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Shamar Davis, and my topic today will be the Akwamu Slave Revolt of 1733. The beginning of the revolution. The Akwamu Slave Revolt of 1733 on St. John was a rebellion against slavery imposed by the damaged plantation owners. The revolution started in 1733 to 1734, during which armed Akwamu slaves captured the contested Danish West Indies island of St. John. The revolt lasted for 6 months. On November 1733, 150 slaves revolted against Danish masters in the plantation. This was one of the longest uprisings in the Americas. For several months, slaves directed their anger and aid towards white estate managers to overthrow them and take control. Unfortunately, they failed to do so because of the Danish call for reinforcement from neighboring troops. The reasons for the rebellion. The large group of enslaved Africans working on the St. John plantation became fed up with the hostile treatment of the plantation overseers and the hard labor imposed on them. Despite the defeat, the slaves died for futuristic victory. Thanks to the rebellion, the Danish government established a courthouse and prison in Cruz Bay and committed to improving the treatment of St. John slaves, making their rights and pleas for justice state issue. The government also set in place a 12 years plan to dissolve and abolish slavery. The building is known as Battery, also known as Battery. It is the only dated building back in Danish colonialism. I would say this day, I would recommend this day as a day that everyone should appreciate and be grateful for, because if it wasn't for our ancestors, we as the younger generation will not be here today. So we should be appreciative of this. And that should conclude it. This is my citation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's show some applause for your colleague in your class. You all are really covering quite a bit of ground, so thank you for sharing these very engaging perspectives. I can see that a number of you look at resources that come from not only Danish archives and looking at the references, you're also looking at things that are part of the African American discourse around this significant happening on November 23rd, 1733 and beyond. So let's continue. Tashara Henry, you'll need to stop sharing your screen, Mr. Davis, so that Tashara can do so. Thank you. Are you prepared, Ms. Henry?
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm prepared. 1 second. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tashara Henry, and today I will be presenting Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. I'm so sorry for my...
Don't worry about it. Okay. Let's move it forward. We're good.
The Danes established sugar plantations and large-scale farming of plants and cotton. The demand for sugar was so high in Europe that hiring labor services was too expensive, so they turned to enslaved Africans and looked to them for labor. By mid-1733, there were about 1,087 Africans to 206 Europeans. Most plantation owners lived in St. Thomas, so they hired managers as overseers, and these managers were basically too cruel to the slaves. The 1733 St. John Rebellion. In 1733, these enslaved Africans working on the St. John plantations grew tired of the hostile treatment and the hard labor imposed on them. The large number of enslaved Africans, which had outnumbered the whites, and the slaves used this to their advantage. They took over a small Danish fort and signaled with cannons the beginning of a revolt. This rebellion lasted about 6 months. Brifu. Brifu was an African woman from Ghana, known for leading one of the longest recorded slave revolts in North American history. She is remembered as Queen of St. John and is celebrated annually with a parade. The aftermath. On April 23rd, to the military on the island of Martinique to help with the matter of rebelling slaves. Most of the rebels were killed during the fighting, or they choose to kill themselves over being caught again. There were 41 rebels captured alive and 18 were executed in the most horrific ways. The Danes quickly restored their plantations and sugar productions. Thanks to the rebellion, the Danish government set up a courthouse and prison in Cruz Bay and committed to improving the treatment of St. John slaves, making their rights and pleas for justice of state issue. And here are my references. That's the end of my speech. Thank you.
Let's show our support for your colleague. We're really moving forward in swift. Thank you very much. The next student that will share will be Shania Rivera. Ms. Rivera, are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes, I am. Hold on.
Just tilt your camera a little bit so that we can see below your mouth line.
That's better?
Yes.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We just need you to open it up properly. Yes.
Okay, good day. My name is Shania Rivera, and my presentation will be on the Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. So just a little history behind the Danish. Oh, sorry. So in 1618, Danes took control of St. John and established sugar plantations and farmed plants like cotton and indigo. So sugar was very high in demand in Europe, and the Danes realized that they would be very wealthy off their sugar plantations. And because hiring laborers were so expensive, they decided to have slave laborers that were more efficient, and it was very cheaper to work the sugar fields. So by about 1733, the Danes had about 109 plantations and about 1,000 Africans from Accra. So the slave treatment. So working as a slave was very brutal. Slaves had to endure working in the hot sun with limited supplies like food, water, and medical assistance. They had to endure whipping, death by hanging, and amputation of limbs if they were ever disobedient. And if the slave ever tried to run away, they would be put to death or receive 150 lashes with the removal of one ear if they were ever forgiven for running away. So the mastermind behind the rebellion. In 1730, many Akwamu people were enslaved after their king died and were transported to St. John. After enduring so much, slaves, including the Akwama people, fled and hid within the woods to plan their revolt. A girl named Brefu led the people, and they were able to kill guards with knives and guns. And the people took control of most of St. John, where they burned homes and burned crops as well. So there were many reasons for the rebellion, but I'm just going to list a couple here. The slaves were tired of the harsh treatment and just couldn't take it anymore, and they worked so hard and received hostile treatment. And the Accra people were very known to be smart and wealthy, and because of their smartness, they were able to come up with plans and take control of the island. So the end of the rebellion. The rebellion lasted until April 1734, and the French military agreed to help the Danish regain control of the island. Later the same month, leader Brefu and 23 of her followers committed suicide to avoid capture. And by May, the Danish were able to regain full control of the island and continued their plantations. And by August, they were killed. The rest of the Brefu people were killed. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Let's share some applause for your colleague. Everyone is pretty clear on a number of things, just keeping in mind that that 1600 period was more like an investigation into what was available to colonize in different spaces, and not necessarily only the Danish kingdom was present in the 1600s. So our next presenter will be Ms. Gentius. Ms. Gentius, once Ms. Rivera takes down her share screen.
I'm trying to make this thing big. I don't understand this thing.
If you can just unshare, that way we can move forward.
Yeah, it's not even giving me the option to unshare. I have to make it big.
Okay.
Hold on, sorry.
Don't worry about it. I have you. We can make it happen.
Okay, find it.
Yeah, but no, you're good now. We can undo.
Okay.
Just keep in mind, for the context for persons that have just joined us, we're actually discussing Virgin Islands Legislative Act 6285, along with the actual Virgin Islands Code that has designated November 23rd annually as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. And we have students from the University of the Virgin Islands here on the Albert A. Sheen campus on St. Croix that are taking the communications course, public speaking, that are sharing some of their presentations. And we will hence continue with Miss Zephania Gentius. Are you prepared, Miss Gentius?
I am.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. My name is Zephania Gentius, and I will be presenting on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. So, slavery has solidified the place of the Virgin Islands in history. And today, November 23rd, is a very significant day for the people of the Virgin Islands of the United States, because it was on this day, 1733, that marked one of the longest rebellions against slavery in the Americas. That uprising took place on our sister island, St. John, and was masterminded by Princess Brifu, who was of Ghanaian descent. There were several reasons that initiated the revolt. The slaves, they were ill-treated and they lived in inhumane conditions. But most importantly, the Aquamo people, they were wealthy merchants and they were resentful that they were captured and were made slaves. So Princess Brifu, she masterminded the plan to take control of the island and use the slaves as the slaves that were on the island as workers so that they could continue on with the production of sugarcane. So many people, they were successful in the attempt, and many people were killed, to include slaves that revolted against them. And the rebellion lasted for 6 months and ended in April of 1734. However, those Aquamo people, the Aquamo enslaved, they were captured, or they committed suicide to avoid capture. And the rebellion, it somewhat influenced the Danish to end slavery. And in conclusion, to me, the Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters, they mean that, we should not be feel oppressed or be enslaved in the house of the oppressed. And when I say that, I mean that if we feel a certain way about a situation, we do have a voice, and we should definitely speak on it, because it only takes one voice to make a difference. And that concludes my speech, and these are my references.
I really am looking forward to looking at some of those references, because I see that you use some things from various scholars in the African continent, in addition to those from the Danish nation, in addition to those from the Caribbean. So that was very noted. And in my oversight, I want you to stop sharing your screen. Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Let's prepare. You did give round of applause for Ms. Gentius. I don't wish for anybody to think I forgot anyone. Yes. And then welcome Miss LaToya Hutchinson.
Hello, I'm trying to share my screen, but it says someone else is.
No one else is using the screen right now. But what we can do, give me a second. Let me put something up and then I'll take it down just to kind of reset. No worries. You can tell that I really like for persons to know that this is the law and this is not just an idea and a thought process from Virgin Islands Legislative Act 6285. Okay, so no one's sharing now. Would you like to try again?
Okay, I about to share. Can you see my screen?
We see your screen, but we're seeing, right now we see your PowerPoint presentation and now it went to something, it's loading, it appears.
Okay. So you can see it and you can see me?
We can see, yes.
Okay. A pleasant good afternoon to all. My name is LaToya Hutchinson, and today I will be presenting about VI Freedom or Fortsburg Day. The slave trade. St. John was embarked upon in 1718 for the motive of establishing plantations where sugar, cotton, and other crops could be developed. The most profitable crop was sugar. There were 208 European settlers and 1,087 slaves on the island of St. John. On the islands, the enslaved lived in very poor and harsh conditions. If they were caught trying to run away, they would have their leg amputated or be given 150 lashes and lose an ear if forgiven by master. 1773, the Slave Rebellion. A slave rebellion, for you guys that don't know, refers to violent acts by slaves seeking better living conditions and treatments. Rebellions took place simply because slaves were tired of being abused and mistreated. They were fed up with their harsh living conditions. They were also tired of witnessing each other die and live harshly. St. John was a Danish colony, which was later captured by Akwamu slaves and was held captive for a few months. Coral Bay Fort was captured by the Akwamu slaves with their intent of gaining crop and using other African American slaves for labor and manpower. Planters then kept fighting and later gained control back in 1734. The Akwamu were defeated. French and Swiss soldiers from Martinique's French colony placed an end to this rebellion in August 1734. The slave revolution resulted in about 50 plantations destroyed, sugarcane fields dismantled, and European settlers were killed, leaving the rebels controlling the island. In conclusion, Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is observed on November 23rd annually. This day is very significant, and we shall keep up with our history and honor all our ancestors who fought for their rights. During this presentation and readings, I have gained much more knowledge about my history here in the Virgin Islands, which is very important to me. The brave Virgin Islands freedom fighters paved the way for us and should never be forgotten, and this day should always be honored. Here are my references, and thank you for listening.
Let's show applause for your colleague. And I know that you meant 1733 throughout, and in our excitement, it appears that you chose to pick a different year, but you had the 3 in it, so I'm comfortable with that, because it's really important that persons keep at the forefront of their mindset what was happening in 1733. That was actually much earlier than many other rebellions, revolutions, and what people call insurrections, riots, etc. Because as quiet as it's kept, no enslaved African went along with enslavement, ever. There was always resistance. Was always resistance. There was always resilience, and it was a back and forth situation. That's why when persons think that Maroons only exist in Jamaica, when we start to look at what Marinage is and runaway enslaved Africans, was a consistent, ongoing reality, right? So what took place right here in the former Danish West Indies on the Isle of St. John, and you'll notice when you study and look at your different resources, St. John is spelled ST period JAN, like Saint John, not John, JOHN, as it is now. And it's just something to really keep in mind. And hopefully this will stimulate each of you to do some additional research and so forth. Our next person, let's go in our list, is Mr. Wilson. Are you prepared to share your screen, J. Wilson?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, so can everybody see and hear?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So good afternoon. My presentation today will be on Freedom Fighters Day by me. Now the purpose of my speech is just give a brief overview on what this day is and the significance and why we celebrate it and why it is important. So what is Freedom Fighters Day? It is a day where we honor the Akwamu slaves who rebelled and fought for their freedom on St. John. It started on November 23rd, 1733, and lasted for approximately 6 months, and is now celebrated annually on November 23rd. So some reasons that caused or pushed the slaves to rebel were mainly the harsh treatment that they were receiving from the lashes and the works, and like working in harsh conditions. Also, if they tried to run away, they would get one of their legs cut off and receive lashes and on their backs and stuff like that. Or they would get one of their ear cut off and lashes too. Also, starvation played a part of it because the whites they didn't really care about them. They just wanted them to work on their plantations and not really care about their nutrition, health, I guess. And also they outnumbered the white civilians, so they see it as an opportunity to take control. Now, why is it important to me? This day is important to me simply because it's a day where I can honor those who give their life fighting for the freedom that I have today. And that's very important because some of us take it for granted where we are now. And for me, I like to, honor and respect for what they've done, because if they didn't do it, then I won't be in the position that I am today. With that being said, these are my references. If you guys have any questions or want to look up anything, you could take the references. Thank you for your time.
Let's show applause for your colleague. Well done. Because you know that I'm going to ask that question that I didn't ask you before we got on air. Just know that I'm going to ask some questions. So we're on top of this whole conversation, because these are the types of opportunities, you know, I'd love for students to start to think about, you know, what are students to be responsible for in the event that some of these observances in the Virgin Islands are overlooked, or let's say, you know, because persons may not really know what Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is. They may not be familiar with the fact that there's a Virgin Island Code and that there's an actual Virgin Islands Legislative Act that gives detail and history to what took place on November 23rd, 1733, and how that relates to what happened in 1759 with William Davis, and how that relates to the abolition of the enslavement trade as an industry in the early 1800s, or what led to Virgin Islands emancipation in 1848, or what led to the fire burn. I like how some of you were able to bring it from 1733 and how that activity in 1733 had influence on the Danish colonial laws and codes, etc., and how it affected things again over 100+ years later in regard to the fire burn of St. Croix in 1878. And then we could even bring it more forward to what took place in the first nonviolent protests that was successful in St. Thomas in the Caribbean, then Danish West Indies, in 1892. And then we can start to talk about how these types of insurrections and rebellions and activities and protests affected what took place in the early part of the 20th century, and actually why it became less economically advantageous for the Danish nation to continue to hold on to the Danish West Indies, and that there was a transfer, purchase, sale of the Virgin Islands. So see how all of these things come into being when we talk about Virgin Islands, and we need to speak about all of those freedom fighters of 1733, all the way up to present. And this gives you an opportunity to share in that regard. So hopefully we will move forward. Let's see. Destiny Gerard, are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Is it sharing it?
Not yet, love. Now it is, yes.
Good afternoon. My speech today is on VI FreedomFighters Day. My general purpose is to inform, and my specific purpose is to inform my audience about Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is recognized annually on November 3rd, and it is symbolic for the revolution that was organized by Aquamu slaves on St. Thomas, which happened in 1733 on November 3rd and continued for 7 months. The revolution began when a small group of slaves smuggled weapons to kill several Danish slaves at estate. Can you guys hear me? Fortsburg. Can you, hello?
We do, we see you very well.
Fortsburg and Corazbing. They fired cannons as a signal that the slaves on the plantation also revolted. About 50 plantations were destroyed, and the rebels soon controlled almost the entire island. Historians said that the leaders of the revolution did not seek to completely destroy the plantations as they planned to take over. Why is this important to me? It's important to me because it taught me to be your own person and fight for your rights and equality, and don't let nobody judge you, and stick up for yourself. This is my references.
Thank you for sharing your reflections. And again, we are looking at being able to have the conversation and close out our discourse around the importance. You know, we're going to definitely go around the room again so we can have that discussion. Why is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day important? You know, this is an opportunity. There's some really key people that when you all are complete, I'd like to make sure as we talk about tributes, you know, persons that come to mind as freedom fighters, persons that were significant leaders, but specifically around rebellions, revolutions, uprisings for what was now we call it human rights. For some, maybe civil rights, labor rights, but just for the opportunity to live and exist and to flourish, you know, as human beings. You know, so it takes us, of course, Queen Brefu, of course, King Kanta and Prince Claes, you know, and we're speaking of the names that have been documented from 1733, you know, in Danish archival record, things that are passed down by oral history and myth teaching, as well as records that are coming from outside of West African regions, learning now that even some of the persons we thought were coming from Ghana in West Africa were actually captured in the interior, more towards the central, southern West African regions, right? And that they were captured from their respective places of civilization, and they were brought into Western African portions like Ghana, as well as Nigeria and other parts of the West African region, and then transported into these enslavement industry trades, right? Where persons referred to as the triangular slave trade. And we have had these discussions that no woman gives birth to a slave. And I always give credit to Claudette Adjoa Young Hines for reminding us of that right here in II St. Croix. And so we use the term of what was done to these human beings. These are enslaved Africans, not just African slaves or Black slaves, right? When we speak of Eurasian or European indentured servitude, we don't just say that they were indentured serfs. We speak of it as that the process of what was done to them, they were indentured, right? You don't just call people slaves to the best of your ability. That's how we start to empower and use a very 21st century voice to how we start to bring these conversations up forward. And our next person, and I want to make sure that Tahira Matthew, are you prepared to share your screen? And we see you and your presentation. We're looking forward.
Virgin Freedom Fighters. The general purpose / central idea is to inform my audience on what Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is. Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day was adopted as a day of observance in the Virgin Islands through encouragement of Emanuel and to a bill sponsored by a former senator at large, Amaldo Rocky Liber, made in law by Governor Charles Turnbull in 2002. Governor Charles W. Turnbull designated November 23rd as Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day across the territory. The chance to learn more about the 1733 slave rebellion of St. John honored to this day. As usual, the university have organized stretch to first where the spot of St. John East and where the rebellion began. The Amanu slave revolt of St. John, 1733, slavery imposed by the Danish plantation owners. The revolution started in 1733 to 1734, during which American slaves captured the contested Danish West Indies of the island of St. John. The revolt lasted for 6 months. The revolt was in response of harsh living conditions from drought and crop failure. Many slaves left their plantations to become
You need to unmute, Tahira. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Now we do, yes.
The code was intended to prevent the slave from escaping. Conclusion. By the end of the day, many surviving plantation owners regained their property. The last Amahu rebels were killed in August 1734, officially ending the 1733 slave revolution of St. John. In many accounts of this rebellion, it is revealed that until her death, Breathed, it shocked many people. The Breathed is popularly called the Queen of St. John. And these are my sources and which slide I got the information from. Thank you.
Let's show our support to your colleague. Let's take a moment here because, okay. So the next presenter has required that we do it from this side. So just let us take a moment. Let's think about some words that come to mind when you think of Virgin Island freedom fighters. I'd love for everyone to share a little bit more. Just think of a word when you think of Virgin Islands freedom fighters there. What are some words that come to mind? You can just start to put them out while I gather this other presentation. What are some words that come to mind when you think of Virgin Islands freedom fighters there?
Courage.
Thank you. Courage.
Bravery.
That's interesting. You all said the same thing. Wonderful. Bravery. Honor.
I think of struggle.
Okay.
Endearing.
Endearing. Okay.
Strength.
Do any of you think that you
Resilient.
say it again, please? Okay, I don't think I heard that last part. Taylor, I believe that we're getting ready to show your presentation. Are you? And I know you're ready to go. So let's welcome Dayla Simmons as she shares her presentation.
Good evening, class. My name is Dayla Simmons. I will be presenting VI Freedom Fighters. Next slide.
Did the slide move?
Okay. On November 23rd, 1733. Hello? Can
yes.
You hear me? Okay. On November 23rd, 1733, 150 African slaves from Ghana revolted against the owners and managers of the island's plantation. The Akamu slaves captured the fort in Coral Bay and took control of the island in goal of resuming crop production under their control. About 50 plantations and many sugarcane fields were destroyed, and several European settlers were killed. The planners didn't give up and kept fighting until they regained control of the island in May 1734. The Akamu slaves were defeated by hundreds of armed French and Swiss soldiers from Martinique and was able to put an end to the rebellion in August 1734. Okay, St. John insurrection.
Is everyone seeing the slide that says St. John insurrection?
No, it's frozen. It's not changing.
No, it's stuck on the first page.
Okay, no worries. Just take a moment. Technology is always cooperative. So we will take a moment. We'll go back right here. And what slide do you see now?
St. John insurrection.
Okay, let's roll. Continue, Ms. Simmons.
Okay, St. John insurrection. After the revolt, the lives of the African Americans became more restrictive. They were not permitted to gather in groups of more than 3, carry firearms, and gambling was outlawed. Other crimes such as property damage, rape, and conspiracy to kill were made punishable by the death. Free slaves were no longer allowed to own land. Slave owners who decided to free their slaves were required to pay a tax of European 200, a price much higher than the price of slaves. Okay. Reasons for rebellion. I will only read 2 reasons. The extreme cruelty of the overseers left to manage the plantations of the landowners residing of St. Thomas, and the harsh living conditions arising from the drought in 1725 and 1726, which led to the diversion of the little water to sugarcane and cotton plantations at the expense of the domestic use of water by the Akamo. Next slide. The story of Brefu. As recently stated, Brefu is a female slave from Ghana who led a massive revolt to take over the West Indies in 1733. She empowered 150 slaves to stand up for their rights and rebel against their masters and take over the West Indies. Next, my reflection. Next slide. This project gave me the opportunity to understand the St. John slave revolt in this entirely. The slaves endured countless cruelty under harsh conditions. It is quite unfortunate that they gone through to survive and protect the ones they love. Therefore, it's important that we celebrate those lives lost and the ones that encourage many to rise up and break free. Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day gave us the chance to do just that and to all who played an intricate part in our VI history. And this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. All right. I believe Miss Latoya get it right. Yasmin Lawrenson. Are you prepared to share your screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And Mr. Francis, I take it you'll be prepared to take that anchor as we close out this evening's gathering on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day.
Yes, yes.
Should I start?
Yes.
Okay. And my speech for today is, what is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day? About St. John. In 1733, a group of Akwamu slaves rebelled. They successfully captured the island and held it for several months. The slave trade. Danish colonization of St. John was undertaken in 1718 for the purpose of establishing plantations. Plantations included sugar, cotton, indigo, and other crops. The most profitable one was sugar. In those days, you could compare the sugar industry to drug trafficking. Sugar industry in the West Indies was a big affair. It created a great demand for this exotic crop. The price of sugar was high and the product potential was enormous. Many that were involved in this industry, they lived lavishly. African background of the rebellion. 150 African slaves originated from Ghana and revolted against the owners and managers of the island's plantation on November 23rd, 1733. This lasted until August 1734. They took control of the island and their plan was to resume crop production under their own control while using African slaves for manpower and slave labor. Planters fight and regain the dominant tribe. They established dominance on the trading routes. They fought over tribes and conquered them. It took many captives and sold them as slaves, and they moved along. Many whites were killed. They attacked other plantations like Cinnamon Plantation of the Johnsons. The group there was tough and they attacked with gunfire to use their boats to escape. Reasons for the rebellion. Enslaved Africans working on St. John Plantation became fed up with the horrible treatment of the plantation overseers and the hard labor imposed on them. What Virgin Islands Freedom Day means to me is because it's always good to recognize the slaves and acknowledge their fight for change. These are my references, and this concludes my speech. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Let's show our applause for your colleague and Mr. Francis. Let's move forward. I want to, while he's gearing up, want to make sure that persons remember that one of the former professors here at the University of the Virgin Islands, who also shares the same day as the day of his birth. He is an ancestor now, but we just want to raise him up and show love in that regard, is Professor Jean Kenneth Emanuel, who was instrumental to the development of the actual act, the actual code, a lot of the research that came around that, and also what was referenced in one of your colleagues' presentations in terms of the annual St. John African Rebellion hike and tour that has been initiated through the work of Professor Jean Kenneth Emanuel, Dr. Gilbert Sprauve, and others that have continued it on, including the Pan-African Support Group, brothers like Liba Olani, a retired educator, along with Brother Steve, Brother Lumumba, Sister Dejabana Francis, and others that have always stayed instrumental. Dr. Celia Adeyemi, they have continued this annual hiking tour. So while persons acknowledge this Thursday as Thanksgiving, Fortsburg Day is another holiday, and usually on that second day is when those hikes and tours are conducted in St. John through Estate, from Cruz Bay into Estate Adrian, out to Fortsburg, and many times taking persons to Ram's Head or Mary's Point so they can understand what took place in those areas. And because of the pandemic this year, everything is being done virtually. So just so we have that information for our own use. Let's continue. Go ahead. Let's welcome Benaiah Francis. Yeah, are you prepared, Mr. Francis? Okay, I'm not hearing you.
Okay, my bad. Good evening, class. My name is Benaiah Francis, and today I'll be speaking about the Virgin Island Freedom Fighters Day and the 1733 St. John Slave Rebellion. Okay. My purpose is to inform, but specifically to inform my audience about the Virgin Island Freedom Fighters Day, the 1733 St. John Rebellion, and its importance. Why the 1733 St. John Slave Rebellion started. On St. John in 1733, one of the largest slave rebellions in the Virgin Island history happened. Due to harsh conditions and treatment, the slaves became fed up. The work was very strict. Their punishment, such as amputation of the leg and 150 whips in the back if they tried to escape. The population of the slaves were about 1,087, and the population of the European was about 208. With such a huge difference in numbers, the idea of revolution became tempting. What happened? With the hopes of freedom and to be emancipated, the slaves on St. John took over a small Danish fort on a mountaintop, and with a signal from the cannons of the fort, the slaves on the many plantations revolted. About 50 plantations and many sugar fields were destroyed, and several European settlers were killed. Soon after, the rebels controlled almost the entire island. It took the help of the French military to get this 6-month revolution under control. 41 rebels were captured and 18 executed. This revolt resulted in about 15 plantations destroyed and fields burned, as stated earlier. How I feel about this revolution and the Virgin Island Fighters Day. Along with other revolts, this is very important to me. Things like this always remind me that my ancestors were strong and determined. It also reminds me that my people always resisted, and our freedom was not gifted to us, but the result of our sacrifice and fighting. In conclusion, Virgin Island Freedom Day is celebrated on November 23rd in remembrance of the 1733 St. John Rebellion. This rebellion was one of the biggest rebellion in the Virgin Island history. Events like this led to the freedom of the slaves in the Danish West Indies. And this is my sources, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
So we have covered a pretty robust amount of information. We've looked at a number of your perspectives on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, why it's important to you. We should be serving as the voice, the ambassadors collectively, because each of you were able to give your own slice, your own thread of the tapestry of the richness of the culture, heritage, history, and tradition of Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day. And I'm looking forward to additional opportunities where you'll be engaged in research that leads to publications, leads to transformation on how we teach and engage and celebrate and commemorate Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day, from very humble beginnings of what transpired on November 23rd, 1733 in St. John, all the way through the historical legacy of what is now the Virgin Islands of the United States. As I asked earlier, and I shared what was going to come forward as we get prepared to close, because we'd like to be respectful of one another's times. We know students have other classes that commence shortly. I want to extend thanks to each and every one of you for coming with your arsenal of information and some very wonderful visuals, some graphic additions that really brought that topic to the heights. I'm looking forward to how we begin to encourage persons to remember across the board here in the Virgin Islands and wherever Virgin Islanders are, on the importance of us starting to list those names. So whether we speak of persons like Edward Wilmot Blyden, those names that are more familiar, that we also include those spokespersons. You know, you had persons that were just fiery and continue to keep voice around all things around the freedoms, the self-determination, the liberation, the independence of Virgin Islanders. So we may start with Queen Brefu, King Kanta, and Prince Claes, and many others in between. But let's start to be able to share some of those names, some of those outstanding Virgin Islanders. As we shared a little bit earlier, it gives us an opportunity to really reflect on the importance of freedom fighters, the engagement that is shared amongst freedom fighters. And okay, we just had a moment. We just had a moment. I'm giggling because we're trying to do too many things at the same time. Did the screen come back for everyone? Maybe not. It's fine. Any other final words, any other reflections anyone would like to share so that we can prepare to close out for this evening's gathering on Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day? It was important for persons to be able to see that the flyer that complemented this event, geared around what our students have shared, was so that persons could see those three queens are actually Queen Brethu of St. John, Queen Mary of St. Croix, and Queen Keziah of St. Thomas. And this is an actual piece that was done by a brother, Abrahaman, along with one of our very own faculty, sometimes web experts, other times station manager of the WVI radio, Dara Manifa Cooper, and they really created a visual so we could see all of these things of freedom fighters in one space. This is the 9th annual, you've been part of the 9th annual VI Freedom Fighters Day Roundtable, because that's what we continue to do at the Virgin Islands Caribbean Cultural Center. And the intention for persons that are seeing this rebroadcast is so that people can know more about what we do in accordance to Virgin Islands Act 6285, as well as the code. It gives us an opportunity to remember persons like Professor Jean Kenneth Emanuel, his African name Lebembe, who remains instrumental as a person to speak truth to power and to always highlight the importance of this day until it became law, you know, encouraging information, doing the research so that we can always have what's equivalent to what other nations call a National Heroes Day. This is actually a day to highlight and honor and commemorate freedom fighters here in the Virgin Islands. And again, we're speaking from the Danish West Indies period all the way forward. And another significant person to remember who is always highlighted around the Virgin Islands Freedom Fighter Day observance is Dr. Marva Sprauve Browne, another ancestor who not only was one of the first Africans in the Americas to, out of the Caribbean, you know, from right here, Virgin Islander, true and true, family on all the islands, St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix, and family as well in the what's now the BVI. And Dr. Marva Sprauve Browne was one of those freedom fighters who helped to be at the forefront of the free beach movement, which we now call the Open Beach Act, so that persons have full access in the Virgin Islands to any beach, right? And we should remember those persons. And then in the lower corner, you'll see a picture. This is from the funerary publication, a very informative publication I would like to add. He was born November 23rd, 1941, Professor Jean Emanuel, and he became an ancestor in July of 2011. And just so that you get a visual of who we're speaking about, and you'll see these Andrinka symbols on the side of this program representing all of those wonderful principles of culture, heritage, tradition, and much more that were highlighted. This is being highlighted because we are the only historically Black college and university in the Caribbean. We are also going to have this production shared on WVI radio, in addition to here on Facebook Live. And you all are also significantly a part of the 6th year of the International Decade for People of African Descent that focuses on the recognition, justice, and development of people of African descent. And this is a United Nations designation from 2015 all the way to 2024. So through this particular exercise, we've been able to share in this 9th annual VI Freedom Fighters Day Roundtable our contribution to all of those things. So with that, I'm very thankful for everyone sharing this evening. I know that there were some that may have come a little bit off time, and we're hoping to be able to move it forward. I'd like everybody, one more time, roundtable, once again, give us that word. What's that word? Now that we've shared all this information, everybody's definitely more engaged on what is Virgin Islands Freedom Fighter Day. I'm gonna go around the table. Mr. Davis, your word, please. Mr. Davis, your word.
Appreciative.
Thank you. Ms. Carr.
Bravery.
Thank you. Ms. Similcare.
Courage.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Strength.
Thank you. Ms. Gentius.
Liberation.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrenson?
Grateful.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchinson?
Resilient.
Thank you. Ms. Henry? Your word.
Courageous.
Thank you. Ms. Matthew?
Humbled.
Thank you. Ms. Armatretti?
Endearing.
Thank you. Ms. Gerard?
Darren.
Thank you. Ms. Suarez, your word.
Honorable.
Thank you. Ms. Rivera, your word.
Proud.
Thank you. Mr. Francis?
Pride.
Thank you. Ms. Simmons?
Powerful.
Thank you. And since you're in the room, station manager of WVI Radio and Cooperative Extension Service, new media specialist, Darmanifa Cooper, can we just have your word, please?
Fire bond.
I hear that. So now we have covered everything that we wanted to do. Want to make sure that we show some reactions. How's everybody feeling? We appreciate, this is a time of celebration. This is a time of upliftment. It gives us an opportunity to do quite a bit more. As we get ready to close, remember that Virgin Islands Freedom Fighters Day is to be celebrated November 23rd annually in accordance to Virgin Islands Legislative Act 6285. If we want to get very, very technical, we can also speak of the code, which is part of the Virgin Islands Code, the first chapter of the Virgin Island Code, section 197, where it actually is listed as an official holiday. So this is not just a observance. This is an official holiday recognized by the government of the Virgin Islands. And here at the University of the Virgin Islands, where we have selective holidays, Fortsburg Day is an official holiday here at the University of the Virgin Islands, the only HBCU in the Caribbean and a land-grant institution. So with that, we say good night to our viewers, our listeners, and we're looking forward to more opportunities to share the richness of Virgin Islands culture, history, traditions, and much, much more. Good night.
Good night.